Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here tonight for a conversation about local perspectives on racial injustice. My name is Rachel Smith, and I'm the president of the Media Fellowship House Board of Directors. We're really happy you're here. Media Fellowship House was founded in 1944, so we just had our 75th anniversary a year ago. Our mission is to provide programs that promote diversity, social justice, and economic empowerment. So our program this evening is going to last about 1 hour. We're going to leave a few minutes at the end for people to submit questions if we don't cover specific topics that you want to talk about. Some questions have already been submitted, so we'll call those out at the end. But if you have something additional that you would like to submit, please feel free to use the chat feature on the YouTube screen. You do need to have a YouTube account in order to submit a question, and we're happy to receive them throughout the panel. So feel free to submit them as often as you'd like. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Keller, a member of our board, as well as our wonderful panel, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Rachel. Welcome, everyone, to this very important conversation concerning racial injustice here in the county. My name is Robert Keller, and I am on the board of the Media Fellowship House. I was born and raised in Chester, Pennsylvania. I'm a father, a grandfather, and a former prosecutor. And I'm a white guy who, quite frankly, has lifelong guilt concerning racial injustice and discrimination that's been going on in our county for way too long. I'm proud to be the host tonight, and I want to introduce you to our panel. I'd asked each of them to prepare a brief bio, and at this time, I want to read their words. Dr. Lemon is a lifelong media resident who attended local schools and earned a doctorate in education, culture, and society at the University of Pennsylvania. His maternal ancestors arrived in media as runaway slaves during the Civil War, and his family has lived here ever since. Dr. Lemon is a local author, educator, and historian, and a member of the Providence Quaker Meeting. Summer Peterson is a junior communication design major at Kutztown University. She's lived in media for 6 years and attended school in media for 8, excuse me. And finally, we have Jay Boyer. Jay reports that he's of mixed race and queer identifying photographer, an artist and a creative individual, aiming to embrace and create beauty in the world around him. He was born and raised in media and graduated 2019 from Penncrest High School. When we recruited Dr. Lemon, it was his idea to include young people in our talk, as they are our future, and their life experiences and their opinions matter. We are so fortunate tonight to have a multi-generational mix. So let us begin. Sam, if you don't mind, please start us off by describing your family history here in Delaware County.
Well, as you mentioned, Rob, my maternal ancestors arrived here as runaway slaves during the Civil War. They had to travel separately because they looked distinctly different. My great-great-grandfather was the son of his enslaver, and like his father, he had red hair, green eyes, and white skin. And when he decided to escape, he walked 300 miles from Southampton County, Virginia, to Media, where he was taken in by local Quakers of Providence Meeting. And he said he was never stopped along the way because everyone he met assumed he was a white man. When he arrived here in Media, someone once asked him, Mr. Ridley, are you white or Negro? And he said, I go for both. And that really kind of, I think, was pretty forward thinking for a guy in the 1860s, being able to, accept and celebrate both sides of his heritage And that really kind of set the tone for the rest of my family. As with Jay, we're also multicultural and very, very mixed. I'm really proud of my great-great-grandmother, Cornelius's wife. That was my great-great-grandfather, Cornelius Ridley. His wife, Martha J. Parham, she had to wait until the Union Army was marching by on the way to the siege of Petersburg, because she looked distinctly West African. And so she and her 2-year-old and a 9-year-old and her brother and his 2-year-old waited until the Union Army was marching by, and they made it to the Army lines. And at that point in the war, the Army would not return you to your former owners. She did laundry and carried water for the Union troops. From there, she made her way to a refugee camp outside of Washington, D.C. And from there, with the help of the Underground Railroad, made her way to Media, where she was reunited with Cornelius. One of the reasons why, there are a number of reasons why these people are so deeply important to me. One, I've always thought of them as incredible role models for their courage and their resilience, and what they had to overcome in the earlier parts of their lives. My great-great-grandmother, Martha Jane, had been a breeding woman on her plantation, beginning at the age of 14 until she escaped about 10 years later.
What's a breeding woman? What is that?
Well, that is a slave woman who is forced to bear children every year, and slaves were actually very expensive to buy. Most slave owners had 5 or fewer. Unlike Cornelius's father, who owned about 300, that was really quite unusual. Martha Jane's owner probably owned far less than that, but slave breeding was really a cottage industry, particularly in the northern part of the South. So women were forced to have children. Those children typically would be taken away and sold off from her because people often wanted to buy slave children. They were cheap. They lasted a long time. It wasn't like paying, say, $1,500 for a full-grown man like Cornelius, or maybe $1,200 to $1,500 for a young, strong woman like Martha Jane. But she was really quite traumatized by this experience. And it's a part of slavery that people really don't know much about or aren't aware of. From the film Roots, the television series, and 12 Years a Slave and other things, people are used to seeing, about slaves being whipped and families being broken up, which was absolutely horrific. I mean, that was as bad as whipping in many cases. But the idea of slave breeding, where you're actually breeding people like you're having a kennel of dogs, it was just totally repugnant. I mean, it's almost like a Nazi, type of pursuit in terms of, them trying to breed out the undesirables from the population. So these are stories that my grandmother told me when I was living here in this house with her many years ago when I was a kid. And, she said to me, and these were her grandparents. So in terms of history being handed down, I got all the history I know right from my grandmother, who got it directly from her grandparents. And my grandmother was in her 30s when her grandparents died. So her memory wasn't hazy. This isn't long ago stuff. And as I often say to people, it's not ancient history, it's family history. And we know from scientific studies, from slavery and from the Holocaust and other, horrific experiences, trauma can be passed down genetically over the generations. So that people today who have ancestors that died or suffered during the Holocaust or during slavery, we can inherit in a physiological way those traumas. Slavery and its offspring, Jim Crow discrimination, shortens people's lives. And they cause, among people of color today and their descendants, things like hypertension, high blood pressure, blood sugar problems, nervousness, stress, all of those kinds of things that can actually shorten people's lives. So we live in this kind of mythical, this time of rewriting history. And you hear this phrase about, oh, it's a culture, a cancel culture now. People don't like something, then they just want to tear the statue down. When people say that, what they're actually suggesting is a continuation of the mythology of racism that's been sanitized over a period of 150 years. Many of those statues of the Confederate generals and the Confederates were traitors to our country and made war on the United States of Americans. Those statues really weren't erected until about the 1920s and 1930s as a way of having this revisionist, this nostalgic memory of the lost cause and the genteel, Southern plantation
Absolutely.
where the slaves were happy.
And we're going to address that later on, but talking about your family, Sam, just bring us up to I mean, there's so much history that you have. I know you don't have a lot of time, but bring us up to
okay.
now.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I grew up in a time when there was still de facto segregation in media, and there were certain pockets, this as well, in media where families of color lived. You couldn't just live anywhere you wanted. There were certain pockets of areas like North Media, South Media, East Media, the Park, those types of areas. When I was growing up, there were stores on State Street where you really were not welcome to go in. I had an uncle in the 1940s who was arrested in the Media movie theater because he didn't want to sit in the colored section. So he was arrested for doing that.
Was there also the Ku Klux Klan that came into media?
Yes. Actually, yeah, the Klan was active in this area. Probably around 1920, they visited this house, or the backyard of this house. My great grandfather lived here at the time. They were looking for somebody, and they thought the person had sought refuge here in this house. My great grandfather, who was the county's first attorney of color back in 1891, he went out and talked to them. I'm sure he knew who they were, despite their hoods. They eventually left, marched up Bottle Street to Sandy Bank Hill, and had a cross burning ceremony. These are microcosms of what have the events that have occurred in our nation, in our nation's history. And I kind of came in at the tail end of that. I wasn't exposed to as much racism and segregation as my parents and grandparents, and certainly my ancestors. But even in my time, being a fifth grade student, for example, we took a trip to Williamsburg, and there was this very complicated process of choosing who our roommates were going to be. And so, not knowing as kids, we had friends of all colors. We chose who we wanted, and then when we got to Williamsburg, we found that our white friends weren't in our rooms. That only children of color were roomed together and white kids were roomed together. And even locally, at the local swim club at that time, that was segregated. So children of color, and that includes, my Jewish friends and my Asian friends, along with me and other children of color, were not permitted to swim there because their families could not join membership. So, again, this is kind of lived history. And these are the things that inform my behavior and my thought patterns, and challenges me to be an outspoken critic of racism my entire life.
Well, Sam, thank you. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. And I just wanted to talk to Summer for a minute. Summer, thank you for being with us tonight. And could you just tell us a little bit about you?
I've lived in Delaware County pretty much my whole life. I've lived in Lansdowne and Media mostly. My family is from Philadelphia. My parents were born and raised there, so they wanted me to live in the suburbs basically. I went to Catholic school for 4 years in Lansdowne, and then I went to school starting in 5th grade in Media up until 12th grade, and it was a really different experience.
Tell me about the makeup of your classroom here in public school.
In public school?
Yeah.
I started public school in high school.
So you're saying, so from the one parochial school, you then went to another parochial school in Media?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I started public school in high school.
Was there a big difference in the way you were treated from one type of school to the other?
Yeah.
Why don't you describe that?
Well, when I went to Media Friends, it was a lot different. It was a lot smaller, and I was the only Black kid in my class for 4 years. And I didn't really experience anything too bad, but it was a very like close knit like school. So anything happened, you can talk to the teachers. Like a lot of kids pretty much had a really good relationship with the staff there. High school was like when it came to the population of minorities, it was really similar. I was probably one of like 5 or 6 Black girls in my entire grade. I didn't have like any Black friends in high school except for Jason. Yeah, it was in a way like I did have friends, but in a way it was very like lonely because you didn't have a lot of people that could like relate to you in certain ways.
Were there many African American teachers along the way?
No, when I went to Media Friends, there was probably 2 African American teachers, and when I went to Pencrest, there was 2 teachers and 1 guidance counselor.
And tell me about how your school experience was being one of the very few of African Americans in the school.
Whenever like something would happen that was a little like well, I did have like a few racist experiences, and it was hard because I felt like I couldn't talk about it with anyone because I felt like, well, 1, like nothing would be done, and 2, it's no one I was close with could really like relate to it, or in a lot of cases when I would talk about it, no one would do anything. People,
do you mind sharing some of those experiences with us tonight?
Yeah. So one experience, I was like one of the few kids in my grade who didn't go to public school for middle school. So a lot of the kids already knew each other going into high school. So I'd already felt a little isolated because of that. In one of my English classes, we were reading that semester Huck Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird. And I do remember like my teacher warning our class like beforehand and like saying, you know, the N-word's gonna be in this book. And there's gonna be times where I'm gonna read like a passage, or we're just gonna have like reading during class. And it made me like feel really uncomfortable because she would, you know, openly say the N-word in class. And I was like one of 2 Black kids in that class. So that was one experience. And in that same class, there was a girl who I wasn't friends with, but she was friends with some of my friends. And she came up to me during lunch, and she was like, "Summer, did you know there's a character in the book called like N-word Jim?" And she said the word. And she was like almost like taunting me about it. And I just felt like I couldn't do anything because I felt like if I were to say anything or like cause a scene, I'd be like the new angry Black girl who just screamed at this girl for no reason. It wasn't a big deal, or, you know.
So there was no one in the school that you could really talk to about it, I guess.
Yeah, I never told anyone like of authority at the school about it. And I didn't tell anyone, like any of my friends about it till like we were seniors, and this happened when we were freshmen.
Were you able to go home and talk to your family or people outside of school about it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Jay, tell us about your experiences growing up. I mean, it sounds like you had a lot going on coming from a multiracial family and also being queer identifying. I mean, you had a lot on your plate.
Yeah, so I grew up in media. I grew up in the Lima area up until I was 4. I don't really remember that much, but then I moved into an apartment in Upper Providence, and I lived with my mom and my dad for the first 9 years of my life. And it was really interesting for me being younger because I didn't really understand what was happening. So one of the first instances I vaguely remember, because I remember my mom talking to me afterwards, was I was probably 3 or 4, and my hair, I can grow out a huge afro if I want to. It was probably like this. It used to grow down. It was very large. I hadn't gotten my hair cut since I was born. And I remember this experience where someone called me a little N-word child because of my hair. And that was really conflicting for me when I was younger, because I remember the conversations it sparked with my mom afterwards. There was a lot of dialogue about being mixed race, and a lot of dialogue about the police and being cautious with the police. And I kind of struggled to understand this a little when I was younger, because I don't have a lot of a connection to a lot of my family. So my dad is biracial. His father is African American. And so he also has lighter skin. So my family was light skinned, yet we have this kind of complex multicultural heritage. And it was really conflicting for me growing up, kind of dealing with that. I always kind of felt out of place with my race. And I also had a lot of the other personal things, like with my sexuality and stuff, on top of it growing up. So it really created this complex, self-conflicting dynamic in my life.
So was there any outlet for you to try to talk to someone or to deal with it? Or how
There were
deal with it?
outlets presented, but the topics like these kinds of things, like sexuality and race, like growing up, they were still very kind of taboo. Like people could talk about them, but they didn't want to talk about them. It's kind of like a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. And so I was growing up and I felt like, oh, my parents are accepting. My mom was very embracive of LGBT and like race and all of these things. She was very open, but I was still conflicted because there was this simultaneous culture of things not being accepting, and this stigma of, oh, gay is not okay. And there's still racism in the air, like the still oppression constantly in daily functions of my early childhood.
So, Sam, when you hear these young people talking, I guess the sad commentary is that from you being a kid to now hearing these young people, has much changed in your mind?
In many ways, no. I mean, as Summer was talking, I remember, a number of these little insults that you just got to put up with, because if you don't, then you have a chip on your shoulder, or you're reading in elementary school the book Little Black Sambo, and my name being Sam, people wanted to call me Sambo, so I had to make it really clear with my peers that that was not acceptable. In fifth grade, we had a wonderful music teacher who every week wanted us to sing a number of songs, and one of them was Dixie. The class was about half and half African American kids, kids of color and white kids, and she insisted on making us sing the song. Well, my ancestors were runaway slaves. They didn't wish they were back in Dixie, and I felt it was a betrayal to them if I actually sang that song. So, I kind of had to stand there and mouth the words. But she was always sort of baffled as to why we weren't singing the song more enthusiastically. But again, that's one of those kind of cultural norms that, at least in the part of white educators, they have this kind of ethnocentric view that we have this shared experience, and why wouldn't you want to sing that? Why wouldn't you want to sing the national anthem, even though the third verse talks about basically killing slaves? I think a lot of times, there hasn't been a lot that changed, and the people like Summer and Jay and I, you have to be pretty strong-willed and have a good sense of your own identity and thick skin, and make your own way in life oftentimes.
How was it back in school for you, Sam, growing up? I mean, was there more mixed races in your school than it sounds like Jay and Summer had?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, at that time, that was before the school districts merged. So, media was still kind of the working class, white and African American, community. It wasn't exactly like like everybody's hometown, but families of color had been here a long, long time, just as long, if not longer, than many of the white families. But there always was this kind of feeling that there was sort of a two-tier in terms of education, in terms of businesses where you could go, in terms of things you can do. At one time, media school back in those days had a colored glee club. I mean, that was a few years before my time, but it was just kind of a hard place to be, and you couldn't really talk, as Jay said, with people about these things. You just sort of had to, take your lumps and figure it out on your own.
Jay, tell us a little bit more about what you were going through, because, I mean, could you identify with anyone? Did you have friends who you could relate with back in school growing up? I mean, how was it for you?
I was bullied when I was younger too, so I didn't really have friends consistently until high school. I had a really good friend that I met at an alternative school when I was 11, and we're still friends, and we're very close, and it was really nice having her there, but it was still this kind of layer. We both were young, we both were still growing and learning about the world, and I obviously had this added element of issues that she didn't comprehend or understand, so I didn't really feel comfortable ever kind of talking about it with her either.
Did anyone, do you believe, sensed at school that you were having these issues? Or, I mean, were you identified in any way that maybe you should be seeing this school counselor or being involved somehow to try to deal with those, with whatever was going on with you?
I mean, there was a lot of layers of things happening in my childhood. So I was very much in elementary school, like I was very disruptive. I struggled at home with my home life, and it very much translated into my school atmosphere. And obviously the layer and complexities of my own problems and not kind of having the output to talk didn't really help me. So I was kind of pushed all of these solutions to my problems and never really kind of was given an accessible option to kind of really work with what was really going on. It was kind of like, oh, this will help, this will do, like, this is what's happening with you, rather than allowing me to kind of guide the control of what was happening within my own situation.
So do you feel that you really didn't have any control or any say, or you didn't have a voice, it sounds like?
Absolutely.
Summer, did you feel that way, or did you feel that you were able to express yourself?
I did feel that way, but a lot of it was me putting that on myself. Like I do have a good relationship with my parents, and I knew that I could talk about certain things like that with them, but they're also like pretty protective, and I didn't want to make like a situation at school bigger than what it was, because a lot of it would just blow over, even though it might not, like, should have. But and because of like the schools I went to, and like growing up in media, I didn't like the few Black friends I did have, or like family members, I didn't feel like I could talk to them much, because, they would say, oh, well, you should fit in right with them because you talk like a white girl, and, like, I don't, like things like that, where it didn't make me feel very comfortable talking about like things like that would happen at school.
So it sounds to me like the ideal role model would be a white person versus a Black person. Is that true?
It's not necessarily like role model, but a lot of the time, where if I had cousins and like friends who, because of where they live, they definitely didn't get as many of like the privileges that I would have gotten because I went to school in media. Because a lot of people I like, family members and friends I know, like they go to school in like Chester and Philly, and it's just a completely different environment.
So are you saying that maybe you went to a better school than maybe some of your other Black relatives and friends?
Yeah, I do think that, but and I was like given a lot more opportunities because of that. So it didn't seem like fair for me to like complain about things that happened in like my school.
So did it appear to you that the white schools, the fewer the minority, the better education? Is that what was going on?
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. That is kind of what's going on. A lot of schools who have a higher like white population do tend to have more funding.
Yeah. Sam, what's your view on all that?
As Summer's talking, I keep thinking about all these. It's almost like death by a thousand cuts. These little tiny insults and offenses that you're really not allowed to complain about. And so it's really refreshing for me these days to hear some of my white friends and colleagues talk about how eye-opening it is that we lived in kind of two separate worlds. And growing up, as some are saying, oftentimes you hear these comments like, oh, don't take it personal, or yeah, forget about that person, or he's just being ignorant. Or you're like how many hundreds of those do you have to put up with? Do you have to ignore? It becomes really uh, uh, you know um, like water torture, like this constant drip of racism that you have to just basically accept, and you can't go anywhere with it. You can't complain about it, as Summer said, and you can't say anything at school because people will think that you're a troublemaker, or you just have a chip on your shoulder.
Sam, you were around when Martin Luther King Jr. was at his height, and when he was assassinated, and the civil rights movement. I mean, just talk a little bit about that, and I mean, how far have we come, or have we come very far since that time?
I think ultimately, no, we have not come very far because all those heroes are pretty much killed off and assassinated. Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, who became even more dangerous when after his trip to Mecca, and he saw that there were Muslims of all colors who could be brothers, who could work together. That's when he became an extremely dangerous man. And there wasn't a lot of publicity in the way of black arts, black music, black writers, who are kind of like James Baldwin coming back into fashion these days. So in one sense, it was a period of great hope. That maybe things were going to change. But then when you look on TV and you saw the freedom riders and the demonstrations in the South and the brutality these white people were foisting upon these nonviolent protesters, much like the nonviolent protesters today, it was very discouraging. And I think after Martin Luther King was killed, who, as you know, went to divinity school at Crozier in Chester, it almost kind of reminded me, although I wasn't alive at the time, of the assassination of Lincoln. I mean, that was a period of such great hope, and people of color were going to, get out of slavery and get the right to vote, and then everything was just crushed and systematically so. So, this idea that I think part of the problem was that Reconstruction was never allowed to develop because as soon as white Northerners and abolitionists lost interest, the South, went back to work, and the KKK was founded. Jim Crow discrimination and black laws, and I mean, the KKK is the oldest terrorist organization in America that's still active. And so, you look at what people had to endure to get the Voting Rights Act. Those three college kids who were brutally murdered in Mississippi burning, and the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, and what was achieved. And then more recently, the Supreme Court gutted significant parts of the Voting Rights Act because Chief Justice said, well, we don't have those kind of problems today. Well, if you look at the voting problems today, there is suppression of vote. There is
Absolutely.
taking people's voting away, closing polling places in
Yeah.
minority neighborhoods, places where the voting machines mysteriously break down in the neighborhoods of people of color. It's horrific. So I see, we're having this battle for the soul of the nation again. We're in the midst of a second civil war.
I hear you. Jay, when you hear Dr. Lemon talk, is this a history that you could appreciate with Dr. Martin Luther King and some of the civil rights leaders, or were you kind of like too young, or was it not ingrained in you to even think much about as you were growing up?
You mean like, did I did I respect what I was taught? Kind
Or
of.
were you even taught, or how was it even taught to you in school, and what kind of impression did it even have?
Yeah, the civil rights movement, I remember when it was taught to us. I mean, it's been reinforced in our education pretty much throughout the entirety of from like elementary school to high school from my own experience. However, it's a little contradictory in itself because it acknowledges racism and it acknowledges oppression and the, faults of white people in society. However, it kind of completely doesn't address the fact that life continued after the civil rights movement. So our education system kind of educates us on education and embraces an idea of collectively embracing humanity, and then kind of puts it aside and then disregards the fact that, oh, the civil rights movement maybe notably was 1950 to 1970. And then after that, it's kind of like, oh, like now we're here, and it's kind of like this gap in between time that like, it's like, oh, we've learned about it and now we're educated, when in fact, it's obviously still very present. And a lot of the racism and depression are still going on exactly how it was then and exactly how it was going on at the beginning of the country.
How was slavery taught in school? Was it, are you learning more now about it, or did you learn it the right way, or the objective way back when you were in school?
I think that with slavery, they really, like, off of my own recollection, they really kind of like, it was a very fine line. Like they brought in like a Harriet Tubman reenactor maybe, and made us read a cartoon book about it, but there wasn't really any serious conversation about it. And I think because they kind of put this facade up about it, it didn't really let the reality of it sink in, like the deep horror of it. Like Germany is constantly educating its history on the Holocaust, even from a young age. And it's because it's such an important part of the history that they don't want to repeat. Like they do not want to repeat. And the United States and the education system here does not view slavery the same way and does not view the severe amounts of oppression and lives lost to racism and such the same way.
Summer, did you experience that as well in learning about slavery, and now you're hearing the truth? How was it when you were growing up?
Like when I went to Media Friends, it was like pretty much glazed over. We learned about it specifically like 1 year, and it wasn't taught in very much detail. It was mostly just us watching documentaries and maybe doing a project on it, but like I can't even remember it that well because it wasn't taught to us that well.
This year, after the Floyd killing and all that, and people start to talk more about slavery and hearing about how our leaders in the past, all our founding fathers all had slaves. Was that something that was discussed in school back when you were going to school? Do you remember anything about that?
Vaguely. I didn't really know much about that until high school. I did have a few like good history teachers, but a lot of it I knew because I personally would research it. But I was surprised about how surprised like my classmates would be. They didn't learn much about it at all.
So, Summer, when you hear about like John Lewis passing away this past week, who was a great man, a civil rights leader. Does that resonate for you? Hearing about someone like him, is that an inspiration for you, or how do you?
Yeah, like sometimes when I hear, about like really big civil rights activists like passing away, it's a little like scary. because I feel like our generation definitely is eventually gonna have to like really step up and like take over the roles that these people had, and like seeing how like much older they are and how they're starting to pass away is almost like we don't have, like, I take it as like we don't have as many people fighting for us anymore, especially people who are like that significant
Yeah.
and who are that important.
Sam, what do you think about all that? I mean, are our civil rights leaders a dying breed? I mean, how's the new generation going to help us?
Yeah, I think as Summer was saying, yeah, they certainly are, and it's troubling. But I'm also buoyed up by the the last election, 2018. There were 100 new people elected to Congress, the most diverse freshman class in Congress history. And you have people like Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and many others of her colleague. And I find that really just inspiring and comforting that there is a kind of a new generation of people stepping up, particularly in government where we need it most, because that's where a great part of the systemic racism is embedded. And I think the issues have kind of changed in a sense too, in terms of there's a lot of discussion now. You hear people say, "Oh, well, my family didn't own slaves, and I'm not a racist," and that type of thing. But it's not just about individual responsibility; it's also systemic problems. So, in that series, United Shades of America with W. Kamau Bell, which just began airing sort of fifth season last week. The past episode, he talked about black farmers, and the farmers were talking about how much systemic racism there is within the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So for a black farmer to get a loan approved, and farmers always need loans because you got to plant your crops and you got to hope that they they grow and you can harvest them, but you need money to tide you over. It takes over a year. It takes over 365 days for a black farmer to get a loan approved. It takes white farmers 30 days to get their loans approved. So you can see what people are struggling with. That it's not just this, the bigot or the racist next door, or the person who works at your office. It's also these overwhelmingly huge organizational and systemic problems. The legal system is another. And you look at how many people, 1,000 or so people who've been exonerated for their crimes, and the National Exoneration Registry says we know this is just the tip of the iceberg, because people of color are far more likely to get arrested, to get sentenced to prison, and to be executed.
Well, Sam, so, you know that I'm a former former prosecutor, and I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and you and I have worked together on a remarkable case involving your great-grandfather, and being the first African-American lawyer in our county. We still don't have a lot of black lawyers in our county, and the criminal justice system is flawed. Let me just ask Jay have you encountered police along the way growing up? I mean, have you ever had any encounters or friends of yours who've encountered police?
I have been lucky. I have not encountered, I've definitely gotten some stares before. Notably when I have my afro, I have definitely gotten stared, looked at. I don't know any of my friends' personal, like, deep experiences, but I do know people that have been victims of the police and have engaged in incidents that, could have ended very badly.
When you're like walking in the street or driving in a car, I mean, they talk about driving while black or driving as a minority. I mean, do you have fear of police, or do you feel comforted by police?
I mean, I'm very lucky in a way, to have light skin. When people look at me, they assume that I'm white. And because of that, it gives me a privilege in our society by having this light skin. And because people are generally not usually in the mindset to just kind of take a second and sit and think about something, before they speak, they just automatically assume I'm white, and that is a privilege for me, and I have noticed it severely within my life.
And Summer, how about you? I mean, growing up, have you had opinions about police or policing?
Yeah. I definitely, I'm not like necessarily like scared by the police, but I don't feel comfortable like whenever they're around. Um, Me personally, I've never experienced any like type of like discrimination when it came to the police, but I do know people. I know like one of my brothers was stopped once because they were looking for a guy to like a black guy in the area, and they just happened to see him, and he was, I'm pretty sure, almost arrested because of it. And like I have a lot of black brothers and like friends, and it's like scary to think that they could, be arrested or like discriminated against by police just for, you know doing like whatever.
Do your parents have conversations with you about going outside or being in a car with your fellow black friends, or I mean, or being stopped by police? I mean, are these conversations that you have with family, your brothers or friends, and is this a topic that comes up?
Yeah, like more so once I got older. um my parents always kind of like just put in the back of my head that, you look different than a lot of your friends, and you don't have the privileges they have, and you may one day be stopped, or like you or one of your black friends may be stopped, and this is what you need to do. And that's like scary sometimes. Just thinking that you could just be walking in your own neighborhood, and you could be stopped. But a lot, like, I don't even think my parents really instilled like fear in me about that type of thing, and it wasn't until, when you see a lot of police brutality over like the news and like social media, that's when it kind of becomes more scary to me.
So tell me, I mean, with George Floyd and the other unarmed African Americans being killed by police, I mean, how's this impacted on you? I mean, is how stressful has your life been, or I mean, is it an overwhelming fear or concern that you have?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like before this year, it wasn't something, it's definitely something I always noticed, and um, something that like has always stuck with me. But it wasn't until like George Floyd happened where I actually was like really, really angry and not just sad about it, and like really outraged that, like, this is still happening. And even more so since like now I'm 20 and I'm like an adult, and I'm like gonna be out in the world by myself, and things like that, it just, I don't know, just makes you scared to go out in the world.
No, it is sad. Sam, do you have some advice for these two young people? I mean, what do you think about all this?
I wish I was as wise as they are when I was their age. Yeah, it's a lot to take in. It's a lot to think about. And as Summer is saying, I mean, we're kind of at the mercy of other people's perceptions. Particularly where it comes to the police, and you can see, and this is one of the things that Attorney General William Barr was questioned intently about yesterday is why do you handle white protesters and black protesters differently? The white protesters in Minnesota who were carrying armed weapons, screaming in the faces of state police officers. Why did you do anything about that? But yet, peaceful protesters of people of color, in Portland, for example, you send unmarked federal troops out to rough them up and haul them away. So again, I think that you know we do need a revolution in terms of getting back to or achieving honesty and integrity in government, in law enforcement. That's not to say everybody in law enforcement is bad, but there's more than just a few bad apples. And I wonder why all the good apples don't say anything about the bad apples, and why unions protect bad people oftentimes and don't give the good police officers the kind of support and encouragement that they need. So I think that I hope that they'll in their studies, and Summer said most of what I've learned on my own. I learned outside of school. So self-education is extremely important. To be well read, because your opinion matters just as much as anyone else's. And information, is extremely important these days. Continue to make friends across, ethnic and socioeconomic lines, and be a soldier in the battle against bigotry and racism.
Jay, whenever I talk with you, you always seem to have a smile and to be an optimistic person. Is that the real you?
I'm just a very no, but yes. When I'm talking to people, I just get this energy inside of me that's just so when I'm talking about things that I'm passionate about, or things that I genuinely care about deeply, I get very motivated. I'm very relaxed. I have a lot of energy, but it's very hit or miss. I'm either completely still and quiet, or just chilling around, or I am very loud and speaking a lot and in your face.
Are you optimistic? I mean, when you see these demonstrators that's multiracial, there's a lot of young people out there. People are now, as Sam's talking about a revolution, I'm sensing it, but is it real? Do you sense it? And what do you think?
I think it's real. It is very real. The motivation that other people are finally taking, and the accountability that other people are taking, while also using their privilege and also just their place in the world to push forward with things that may be perceived as controversial to one thing, but could be perceived as far extremely transformative to the state of the world. People nowadays, and especially our generation, are very loud and very ready to speak up for the right thing, because we were educated about discrepancies in society. We're educated within the things that are wrong, and we have technology, and a lot of us have grown up with technology. So because of that, when someone said something to us, we can just fact check it on our phone. When you can use technology properly. And when you can just fact check things like that, you're constantly learning new things. When you have the internet at your fingertips since you're 7 or 8, it's you've been taking in the whole entire world around us, not just this country. You've been seeing China's news. You've been seeing the Middle East news. You've been seeing everything since you're a child. And a lot of people in my generation really see the world, and they can really call BS on everything. And they're really ready to motivate everyone and make sure that everyone's staying strong and in this together. It's all about community. I think a lot of people feel the pressure is solely on themselves. And in a way, you're solely responsible for your story and telling your story and communicating it. But at the end of the day, coming together and creating community and solidarity is so important for pushing forward with the kind of what's the name.
Summer, tell us briefly how you met this guy. How did you guys find each other?
I was a junior and he was a sophomore. And we went to the same high school, and we went on a New York trip. And we I don't think we liked each other too much when we first met, but we did talk a lot that day. And we were on the same bus for the next 2 years. So we really bonded on the bus and sat next to each other every day and just talked. And he lived down the street from me.
And you're still friends, and you're here tonight, and we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic, Summer? Do you feel we have a chance here? Is this our moment to do something right?
Yeah, I think that it is. I feel a lot of people are stepping up and speaking out, but I feel there's a fear of it dying out a lot, or not getting as much attention as it is now over the years. So I just hope that as much hype as civil rights is getting right now, I hope it stays that way.
So I have a bunch more questions, but I'm going to just ask Rachel if she has received any public questions or comments, and then if not, I've got several more questions that I want to throw at this group. But Rachel, can you come back on and tell us whether you have any public comment or questions?
Yep, we have one. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sure.
Okay, terrific. We got one, and the question it's for Summer. So Summer, The audience wants to know, it seems like there were a number of moments when you were growing up and in school that you felt alone and that was pretty painful. So what was something that you wish you had, or something that had been in place when you were growing up that would have been helpful to make you feel safer or more empowered?
Honestly, I'm like thankful for the friends that I made in school, but I do think having friends who are your own race, or just another minority kind of helps, because, it's easier to like go, because high school itself is not easy, like to go through, like, and being a teenager is not necessarily easy. So, being a part of a really small population in my school just added on to that. So I do wish in high school I did have more friends who were minorities, just so we could, like, relate to each other and talk about things that, maybe our other friends wouldn't understand. I feel like that would have helped a lot.
Yeah. So, we have a big election coming up in November. Sandy, you want to talk a little bit about voting rights and what we should, what young people, young and old people should be doing?
Yeah, first, I think we should be worried because, as you know, the last election was tainted through the direct, influence of the Russians and Vladimir Putin, as all 6 of our U.S. intelligence agencies stated and found evidence of. They hacked into the electoral system of all 50 U.S. states. They're already exploring the electoral systems in advance of the current coming election. They're also involved in a lot of, they're producing English language articles and things that they're spreading on social media to try and influence people's thinking and ideas. So I would say, number one, get registered to vote. It troubles me when I hear people say, "Oh, why should I vote? What's it going to do for me?" It's going to make a difference in your life, and not just who sits in the White House, but who sits on your local, county and municipal government councils. Who are the local judges? Who hold the key offices, school board, things like that. We have an ability to make an impact in the direction of our community and our lives, but it does take voting. And this year in particular, I think that mail-in voting is going to be a huge issue. Even though the president votes by mail, he is now claiming that voting by mail is fraudulent, and you can't trust the results. And I don't know if I'm going to accept the results. So I would say, yeah, register to vote, vote early, and keep an eye and keep informed. As Jay was saying, having the ability to fact check is extremely important. You saw that interview yesterday of these fact doctors, is what the medical community calls them, who don't agree with Anthony Fauci and what the other scientists are saying about this pandemic. So it's important to be informed, not just to listen to what other people say or hear other people's opinion, but get it from the horse's mouth, get it from authorities. So those are just 2 things that I think everybody can do, and have the tough conversations around the dinner table, around Thanksgiving. Sometimes I hear people say, well, that's a family member. I don't want to cause trouble. As John Lewis said, cause good trouble. Cause good trouble. Yeah. We can't accept the status quo anymore.
Absolutely. Jay, any final comments? I mean, I appreciate your enthusiasm and your voice. What would you like to tell young people out there? What should we be doing? What should, help me? I'm the guilty white guy. Help me.
Thank you so much for this conversation tonight. I definitely think one thing notably for everyone is to love each other and to create community and to make sure you're always lifting each other up and lifting each other in a way where you're not only hearing the other person, but the other person can hear you, and you can see each other and you can work forward and create a collaborative image of the world in a better light. I think we all are very reliant on our individual, and it's good to be self-reliant and it's good to, be self-focused, but I think something that's really been lost is the true value of kind of collective community and really embracing each other and just spreading love. And I know that may sound very hippie, but it's so important. It's so true, and it's so valuable. And I've seen it myself, just creating community. It's not even just about the direct effect of what's happening in that community. 50 years down the road, you're going to be seeing butterfly effects of the small things that have just happened. I always tell my friends, think about when you're thinking about your life and you're struggling, if you're like, am I a good person or not? Think about the good actions you've done, and think about how you may have forgotten about that good thing you did for that one person that one day, but they remembered it. And that butterfly effect of that good thing you did for that other person has carried on and will carry on for hundreds of years.
Great advice. Summer, we're running out of time, but I just want to hear your voice one last time.
I would just say, just speak up in any way you can. I feel like staying quiet during a time like this, just speaks volumes on like the kind of person you are. And I feel like just, even something as simple as posting something that supports, another movement, or watching something like this and being educated on certain topics just helps a lot.
Great. Rachel, anything else before we close shop tonight?
Those are all the questions we had. Thank you, everybody. We hope you enjoyed it. And thank you, panelists. You did a wonderful job. And Robert, thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.